Well, it's summertime and it is time to do some gardening. Folks have already been doing a lot of planting, but also it's the heat. And so, why don't we do some gardening in the shade? I think that's a great idea. And from the Gardening Club, we're going to talk about shade gardening. I want to welcome Geneva Benza and Julie Bawden Davis. And thank you guys for joining us. So, Geneva, tell us a little bit about what you have coming up in your next meeting. It's this Friday, and we're going to be talking about gardening in the shade.
I want to stress that it's this Friday, Clubhouse 5. We will have Julie talking about shade gardening. We'll have a free raffle at the end of the meeting with treats. And in July and August, we're not going to have meetings. September will still be in Clubhouse 5 on the 20th. For our members, we have garden walks. We have happy hours for new members. Holiday luncheon, we have trips and workshops. It's very much a social doing club.
Okay, that's great.
I think Julie will better be able to talk about what she's going to say than I can.
Julie looks like she's doing some indoor gardening there at her house, but let's talk a little about shade gardening. What I mean, I can assume what it is, but tell us a little bit about what the concept is behind shade gardening.
Sure. So actually, there are some indoor plants that can be grown outdoors in Southern California, which is really cool, which a lot of people don't consider. So for shade gardening, as mentioned, when it gets hot, you want to be out in the garden, but then it's like, okay, I'm starting to sweat. It's a little uncomfortable. And I've worked all spring, winter, even in spring to make this a beautiful place. But now I want to go inside to the air conditioning, right? So,
Right.
So it's great to have a shade garden that you can go out, sit under a large tree, sit under a structure, and really enjoy the garden. But at the same time, it's really nice to also have some really nice plants within that shade garden, because you can create a microclimate, a beautiful microclimate of shade garden microclimate in your backyard. I don't think that it's done as often as the full sun gardeners kind of maybe sometimes forget about that until it gets really hot.
Mhm. Now, can folks increase their shade? I mean, can you put things up to like expand the concept of shade gardening? Because some places they don't have much of an awning or they don't have a lot of areas to plant in the shade, but they want to, enjoy the shade, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So a couple of things happen. Sometimes people want to create more shade. Sometimes shade creates itself, right? So obviously planting trees creates shade. Trees are kind of like puppies, right? So they're cute, they're little cute puppy, and then all of a sudden one day it's a big dog. And the
Right.
same thing will happen with trees. So sometimes what happens is you get kind of this shade creep in your backyard where this tree keeps getting bigger and bigger and creating more and more shade. And then one day you look around and all your sun plants aren't real happy anymore. So that's one thing that happens. And then on the other side of it, yes, if you have a landscape where there's a lot of sun, you can put up patio covers work. There's gazebos work really well. You can create a walkway with vines on it, and then of course plant trees as well. Large shrubs will also create some shade, and then you can put outbuildings. So say you've always wanted to build your garden shed, well then build a garden shed, and if you orientate it well, then that's going to give you some shade as well.
Mm-hmm. But like trees are like the 10-year plan. So the instant stuff is the gazebo and the other things like that. But that's a long range on the time. If you're planning on being there for a while, the trees make a lot of sense.
Depending on the trees. So during the drought, I have my garden table, which has a potting bench, which has a built-in sink and everything, but it would get hot. It would get hot in the later in the day when I tend to get out there. I always have big plans for the morning, but it doesn't quite happen. So so I thought, I need something here. Well, during the drought, a fig tree decided to grow there. Now it's covering the whole area. So that was not that long ago. So if you, depending on the trees you choose, but then that's a whole nother, you don't want to open up too many cans of worms in terms of the wrong type of trees, but there are trees that actually will grow quickly, but still be good for our area as well.
Now, when we get shade, though, that can also maybe create its own problems because now these areas that got a lot of sun aren't, and maybe molds or other kind of fungi kind of grow up in that area.
Yeah, so like I was talking about with that shade creep, you look around one day and you think like, what happened to the sun, right? And so you can get more you can get more fungal pathogens because they obviously breed more quickly in shade. It's more humid in the shade, so that also will cause that. But there are ways to, and what I'll be talking about that at my talk this Friday, and it will be there's things you can do. For instance, drainage is really important, and also planting the right plants and spacing plants, air circulation for those plants. Uh, and as mentioned, one of the more critical things is obviously planting the right plants there in the first place, because gardeners tend to have a little bit of hubris where we think, well, I'm a really good gardener, so even though this is a sun plant, I'm sure it's going to do great in my shade garden, and it won't. But that's
Trust me, it'll be fine. I'll make it work.
yeah, I can grow anything.
Exactly. So Geneva, tell us a little bit about you guys have this meeting coming up this Friday, of course, shade gardening, and then you guys go dark a little bit for the summer.
Yeah, with the heat and people taking vacations, we decide not to. We give people a break. We take our vacations too.
They're sitting in their shade garden.
Tell us about a little bit, Julie, in terms of like, what should we think of when we do sun gardening versus shade gardening? Is it a total different mindset in terms of the watering, in terms of obviously the kind of plants we put in there, and is the maintenance a lot different in terms of the fungus and other things that might be growing in those areas?
Yeah, so it does take quite a mind shift, as you mentioned, a different perspective. And I think a lot of times what happens is gardeners approach the shade garden with the sun garden mentality, and that's where things kind of go awry, right? So you do need to consider, obviously, one of the really big considerations is just what kind of is this? Is it a deep shade all day long? Is it a dappled sunlight? Does it get morning sun and afternoon shade? And so what that takes is a lot more observation, because when you have full sun, you have full sun. The sun's going to come up at whatever time it comes
Right.
up, it's going to go down, and that's just going to be blanketed in sun all day. But the shade, there's many nuances, many different things that go on within the microclimate that you create with the shade gardening. So like I mentioned, you want to observe it. Really, what you need to do is observe it throughout the day for quite a period of time before you start planting in there, so that you know what really is going on in there, right? Just because you go out every afternoon and it's nice and shaded doesn't mean it's shaded in the morning. And
Okay.
that will dictate the plants. And also doing a closer check for pests and diseases. The watering, you definitely don't want to be overwatering in a shade garden. However, you don't want to forget, because they also do need water as well. And some shade plants need even more water than full sun plants.
All
So
right,
that
sounds
could
like
be a little idea.
definitely a topic we want to get more information from, and we can all do
Yes.
that coming up with Geneva and Julie this Friday. It's going to be at Clubhouse 5. Doors open at 1:30, and the meeting starts promptly at 2 o'clock. So make sure everybody's there. Geneva and Julie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're watching This
See
Day.
you
Be right back.